Hey everybody, welcome back to me doing this again. It's been a couple of months. So I haven't been doing this for a little bit because this house that we bought used to be a rental property, so it had really shitty doors, and every time I was doing this very loudly, it was kind of reverberating throughout the rest of the house, which was never a problem with the podcast, but whatever. So we got a new door up. It's a little bit more soundproof. I'll probably eventually I'll have to do the Russian thing and start just hanging carpets on my walls and stuff because I don't want anybody to ruin them by walking on them. That would be just unnecessary. So hopefully I'm going to be kind of back at this. I'm trying to get onto a schedule with it, and I just have to. I've been letting myself go with allowing myself to be a little more lazier than I like to be, which has been nice. Nice little bit of self care, but kind of ready to get back into doing stuff, doing more. I guess getting back to doing this. A couple reasons why I like doing these little things. Are smaller. About 20 minutes, and also I like to read from various zines from Vietnam War, leftist anti-war zines, or just zines. Like the one that we're going to do today is going to be from the Lowell Offering. If you don't remember, or if you are new to these things, the Lowell Offering was like probably the very first zine, very first workers zine. It was published by women who worked in Lowell textile factories in like 1940 or 1841. So the very like kind of beginnings of industrialization, which brought along unions, which brought along workers' rights and everything. So we're gonna kind of read from that because I whenever people tell you to read theory and then put down Marx in front of you, I've plenty of people told me it's easy to read. I don't give a shit. What I like to read are what the everyday people wrote. So these women who work here, and it's going to be very interesting because what we're going to be reading is about wanting to work in the factory. So let's kind of get into a couple of other things. The episode that released this week is mostly about the drawdown in Afghanistan. Nate and I talked a little bit about the Germans, the Germans bringing home all their beer because they're saying like, oh, we can't just leave it there. We'll just leave a bunch of trash there, and all the Afghans can't drink, which is news to me that the Afghans can't drink because I saw a lot of drunk Afghans while I was there. But it's Germany; they'll bring their own beer home. But we just really kind of talked about what how nice it is that we are kind of leaving there. Nate and I both spent a significant chunk of our time and our sanity in Afghanistan for really fucked up reasons that now we know were wrong and insane, and we shouldn't have been doing that at all. So there's a lot of heavy emotion into it, but also just kind of talk about all the fun shit that we like to bring home from overseas. So we have that, and then the bonus episode is Kelsey Atherton. Kelsey is a journalist who he discusses drones, AI technology, and nuclear technology. He and I talked about military AI and the stepping stones of like when do we have a Terminator. And how we should have a Gundam because a Gundam requires you a pilot to be in it. It's a wearable suit. Anything that's autonomous though, then we're into some problems. Like we gotta always have a soul behind the pulling the trigger. I guess I don't know. Maybe we'll get over all that nonsense too one day. So that's a really good talk about some of the AI, the movements that we're making, and how AI works, and how in what ways it can be positively put into the into use in the military. Okay, so sorry, make sure my camera's not going to fall off here. Can you tell it's been a while since I've done one of these? All right, so this the Lowell Offering is about factory labor. So a lot of these kinds of writings that they had in here. A lot of them were poetry. A lot of them were just stories. A lot of them were just talking about science, and many of them were written in the form of a conversation. A conversation that two people are going to be having to get a point across. You want to be on the side of the person who is arguing for. Obviously, it's just a way of trying to deflect the questions that you think would come based on what you're going for here. So we have Miss S and Miss B. I'm very happy to see you this evening, Miss Bartlett, for I have something particular to say to you. Now, do you still persist in your resolution to return to your factory employment? I do. I have no objection, neither have I heard any sufficiently strong to deter me. The idea that it is degrading in the opinion of many would be objection enough for me, without taking into account the real tendency to promote ignorance and vice. So this is yes, I'm going to continue to work inside of a factory, and all the working in a factory, here are the things that all the fucking Josh Howleys and Tom Cottons of the time are telling you of why women shouldn't be doing these kinds of work. So we've got the ignorance and vice. By whom is factory labor considered degrading? Is it by those who believe all labor degrading? By those who contemptuously speak of the farmer, the mechanic, the printer, the seamstress, and all who are obliged to toil as belonging to the lower orders? By those who seem to think the condition of labor excludes all the capacities of the mind and the virtues of humanity? They forget the circumstances, over which they have little or no control, place them above the necessity of labor, and that circumstances may compel them to engage in that which they now scoff and spurn. Don't scoff labor. You might have to get your hands dirty one day, too. Well, there are objections to factory labor, which serve to render it degrading objections, which cannot be urged against any other kind of female employment. For instance, to be called and to be dismissed by the ringing of a bell savors of compulsion and slavery. I cannot cease to produce mortification without having been destructive to self-respect. Basically, having a schedule to go to work and come back is just absolute devilry. Again, 1840s. In almost all kinds of employment, it is necessary to keep regular established hours. More particularly so, there are as many connected as in the factories. Because we're reminded of those hours by the ringing of the bell, there's no argument against our employment, any more than there would be against going to church or school. Our engagements are voluntarily entered into with our employees, or with our employers, with the understanding that they may be dissolved at our pleasure. However derogatory to our dignity and liberty you may consider factory labor, there is not a tinge of slavery existing in it, unless there be in every kind of labor that is urged upon us by the force of circumstances. So basically, I'm not forced to do this. This isn't the kind of labor that I have to do because, of some kind of circumstances. I have to toil in a field because we're all, starving and we need, to grow food, or, it's not she's choosing. She's saying, I want to go do these things. And at the time, this was a really big, kind of new concept, because this, working in the factories, having the factory girls, it gave these women the opportunity to be financially independent. So, obviously women who may have lost their husbands, or may not have wanted to get married, or, in some kind of way are out on their own, before things like this, they didn't have a whole lot of options to continue forward. You could marry another man to provide for you. That was about what you had. So this, there's a big push against, doing any kinds of stuff like this, obviously, because they didn't want the women going out and getting jobs and telling the men to go fuck themselves, literally or figuratively. All right, so objections have been brought up against the boarding house, and I think with much plausibility. The large number of females who are there thrown together are unavoidably intimately connected with each other. It cannot be denied that some, guilty of immoralities, find their way into such factories and boarding houses. The example and influences of such must be pernicious, and terminate in the increase in vice. So, at some point in time, you're going to get some bad apples in there, and it's going to ruin everything. These harlots are going to get in there to the boarding houses and make all of you harlots. It is true that the example and influence of immorality, wherever it exists, cannot be otherwise than evil. We know also that some exceptional characters occasionally find a place among those employed in the factories. We know it from the fact that dismissals do now and then occur as of consequence. But, my dear miss, did you ever know or hear of a class of people who could boast of perfection, among whom wrong of any description was never known? No, and as I'm no perfectionist, I never expect to know one. Uh, so, yeah, of course, there's going to be immorality. There's immorality everywhere. They fire women who do that. That is also talking about the contract that they have with their employees, that we're not slaves. We can leave. We can dissolve it as whenever we want. There's none of this 2 weeks bullshit. Just go for it. Then, if in one case the guilt of a few has not corrupted the whole, why should it in the other? Living in a factory boarding house and working in a factory changes not human nature. It is susceptible of good and also evil. There is that elsewhere. I agree with you in thinking that among all classes and in every condition of life, evil influences are at work. But in some situations in life, it's not the exposure to these influences, and much more the extensive and therefore more dangerous, especially to the young. You ladies, you just don't know just how immoral you're going to get. I believe that there are many kinds of female employment offered in our large towns and cities, far more dangerous in this respect than factory employment, although they may be considered to be more desirable and respectable. Now the very fact that, quote, factory girls, end quote, are so, quote, intimately connected with one with each other, end quote, soon lays upon the real character of all, and I assure you, whenever the example of one is known to be otherwise than good, she is immediately removed, how expert soever she may be in her business or profitable to her employees. So, no prima donnas, none of that bullshit. You're out. I may add that if such ones were allowed to stay, they would not, unless they had the faculty of constantly living in hot water. Because if, just as the twig is bent, the tree is inclined, the characters of most are formed before entering the factory. And yet, after all the strictness with regards to the morals and the habits of the female operatives, there are those who think one cannot be honest or virtuous, who have ever toiled in the factory. They are sometimes spoken of, and too, as though they were destitute of sensibility and understanding, and unworthy of sympathy, kindness, or civility. Whether this is the result of erroneous opinions of factory labor or of the idea that all kinds of labor is dishonorable, it is not very gratifying to our love of approbation, though it will not deprive us of that dignity and self-respect which honesty of purpose and industry of that places above dependence always begets. Very hard to read some of these. It's you know what they're saying, but man, it's just in a language that we really don't talk about anymore. But yeah, hey, if they didn't fire her, that girl would not want to stay here. We would make her life a living hell. And it is like, look, we have as this goes on, they talk about we have schools set up, we have classes in our off time, we teach each other things. I mean, this whole thing, the Lowell Offering, was an opportunity for the women in these boarding schools or these boarding houses to, be able to express themselves artistically. And that's not going to bring in all of the bad elements. That's going to have an element of, we want to be here, we want education, we want to do all these things. So, this goes on and on. And it's a very, like I said, reading a lot of the stuff from back in the 1800s, the 1840s, is always, I love the Vietnam era stuff, and I'm going to go back to that next. But I really wanted to do this last one about factory labor because it is a historical marker in women's rights and factory rights and the rights of people to be self-determined. Women are finding this, at this time, I can be independent. I can do all these cool things and, make my own money and live my own life and be educated. And I can find people to be educated with and do educational things. So I've always really loved the Lowell Offering. I highly recommend going out and looking it up. These things are huge. Like there's, hundreds and hundreds of pages. Some of it's better than others, but man, there's some great light. And go back in our archives. I've read from this a lot, so that's highly recommend going back and either listening to some of those or you can always look them up and read them yourself. So thank you again for being on here next week. Definitely going to have something from the Vietnam War. I need to spend more time kind of perusing through. It's been a long time since I've gone through those, and all the archives that I went through are kind of going somewhere else. So I got to make sure that I'm grabbing everything that I've got. So more Vietnam. And possibly next time I'm going to talk about my favorite World War II deserter. I did a thread on him today, but tomorrow or next week we'll kind of go a little bit more in depth with him. So other than that, thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next week.